Hey everyone, welcome to the Bold and Beautiful 24. I'm Alessio, and I'm so excited to have you here. If you love bold and beautiful, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Alright, let's dive right in. The moment was one of those scenes that soap opera fans live for, the kind that rewrites the entire landscape of the story in an instant, a revelation so shocking and unexpected that every single character standing in the room felt the aftershocks reverberate through them like a physical blow, and at the center of it all stood Luna Nozawa, wide-eyed and breathless, her entire world tilting sideways as Electra Forrester, her rival, her tormentor, her mirror in more ways than she'd ever dare admit. Looked her square in the eye, voice trembling yet laced with a peculiar strength, and uttered the 7 words that would send shockwaves through not only Luna's heart but through the entire Forrester and Spencer families. Sorry, Luna, I'm pregnant too. And in that instant Luna felt the air sucked from the room, her chest tightening, her throat closing as though invisible hands had wrapped around her, because up until now she had clung to the fragile, desperate belief that her own pregnancy, messy, scandalous, and complicated as it was, set her apart in this tangled web of lies and secrets, made her the one holding leverage in a war she never asked to fight. But Electra's bombshell stripped away that illusion in a single breath, leaving her exposed, vulnerable, and suddenly uncertain about everything she thought she knew. The silence that followed was deafening, the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece growing louder with each passing second as if marking the precise moment when the story shifted, when alliances realigned and rivalries hardened, and Luna, her mind racing 1,000 miles an hour, replayed those words over and over in her head. I'm pregnant too, I'm pregnant too, I'm pregnant too, like a cruel chant mocking her pain, until finally the dam of her emotions cracked and the torrent of questions spilled forth. Who is the father? Was this some twisted attempt to steal her thunder? Was Electra lying, manipulating the room the way only a Forrester knew how? Or was it true? Was Luna now trapped in a parallel nightmare, forced to share the spotlight of scandal with the very woman who had already taken so much from her? Electra, for her part, stood defiantly, her hand brushing across her stomach with a gesture that could have been subconscious or deliberately theatrical, her eyes flashing with that familiar fire that always seemed to burn brighter when Luna was around, and for a moment the two women stared at each other, a battle of wills playing out without a single word spoken, the weight of their history pressing down on them. Electra's slap that left Luna humiliated, Luna's whispered threats of revenge. Their bitter tug-of-war over men, family loyalty, and the right to claim space in a world that seemed too small to contain them both. And now, with this revelation, the stakes had skyrocketed, because pregnancy wasn't just about babies in the world of the bold and the beautiful, it was about power, legacy, and the futures of dynasties, and Electra knew exactly what she was doing by dropping this bombshell at this precise moment. Luna's mind spun with flashes of what this meant for her relationship with Will Spencer, for her fragile standing with Bill, for her already fractured ties to the Forresters and the Finnegans, because if Electra was pregnant with the child of someone who mattered in this family war, everything Luna had fought to salvage could come crashing down around her, and even as her hands shook and her lips parted in a desperate attempt to speak, she found herself unable to form words, frozen in the moment as everyone else in the room, Bill, Ridge, Steffi, and even Finn, shifted uncomfortably, their faces a mixture of shock, suspicion, and dawning realization that this revelation was going to detonate like a grenade in all of their lives. And as Luna finally found her voice, a brittle whisper of disbelief escaping her throat, "You can't be serious, you're lying," Electra only smiled, a slow, almost triumphant curl of her lips that said everything without needing words. That dared Luna to challenge her, that all but declared war without lifting a single weapon, and in that moment Luna knew this wasn't just another fight between them, this was a battle for survival, for dominance, for the right to control the narrative of their futures, and as her hand instinctively drifted to her own stomach, she felt the icy realization settle deep inside her bones. She wasn't the only one anymore, and that changed everything, forever. Electra's words didn't just hang in the air, they sliced through it like glass shattering, each syllable a shard embedding itself in Luna's chest, and while the others in the room exchanged shocked glances, barely able to comprehend the implications, Luna's entire body trembled with the weight of emotions crashing over her, disbelief battling fury, fear colliding with humiliation, and somewhere deep beneath it all, a flicker of dread that this was only the beginning of an even darker storm, her Lips trembled as she stared at Electra, silently begging her rival to retract the words, to laugh it off as some cruel prank, but the gleam in Electra's eyes told her otherwise, told her that this wasn't a game, it was a declaration, and if Luna thought the battlefield was bloody before, she hadn't seen anything yet, because 2 pregnancies meant 2 futures colliding head-on, 2 families forced to choose sides, 2 potential heirs thrust into a legacy war, and Luna felt herself suffocating. Under the sudden avalanche of consequences, her mind spiraling with 1,000 questions, each more unbearable than the last, was the father will, making this mess even more impossible? Was it someone else, someone connected, someone powerful, someone who could tilt the scales against her? Or worse, was Electra simply leveraging her own body, her own child, as a weapon in a war for attention, validation, and dominance over Luna, who had already been stripped of so much dignity, already painted as manipulative, scandalous, and dangerous by those who never gave her the benefit of the doubt? She wanted to scream, to hurl the truth at Electra with enough venom to pierce that calm, smug facade, but her throat locked up, leaving her stranded in silence, and that silence gave Electra the advantage, her voice low but razor-sharp as she added, "You thought you had the upper hand, didn't you? You thought being pregnant gave you some kind of power. Well, Luna, looks like we're even now." And with that single taunt she demolished what little ground Luna had left to stand on. Bill's face tightened as his gaze darted between the 2 women, his mind clearly racing ahead to the chaos this revelation would unleash on his family. Ridge pinched the bridge of his nose as though trying to stave off a migraine. Steffi whispered something inaudible to Finn, who himself looked torn between disbelief and concern, but Luna barely noticed them. Her world had shrunk to the space between herself and Electra, 2 women locked in an unspoken war where every gesture, every glance was a strike in the ongoing battle, and she could already feel the ground shifting beneath her feet, alliances splintering, secrets mounting, lies brewing like thunderclouds on the horizon. Luna's pulse hammered in her ears as she finally managed to choke out, "Why now? Why tell me like this?" Her voice laced with desperation and raw hurt, and Electra tilted her head, her expression unreadable except for the faint curl of satisfaction at the corner of her mouth, as if she'd been waiting for this very moment to strike, to strip Luna of the one fragile edge she thought she had, and with each breath Luna realized the truth. Electra hadn't just dropped a bombshell, she'd detonated a warhead, and the fallout would touch everyone they loved, whether they were ready for it or not. The silence that followed Electra's icy declaration wasn't just awkward, it was suffocating, a silence so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were bending under the pressure, and in that silence, Luna's mind betrayed her, replaying the possibilities in vivid, horrifying detail, because pregnancy wasn't just about the baby, it was about the father, the family, the future, and the way those 3 things tied together in a knot that could strangle reputations, destroy love, and shatter lives. And the thought that Electra could be carrying Will Spencer's child clawed at Luna's insides like broken glass, because if that were true, it would mean everything Luna had endured, all the accusations, the whispers, the shame, would be multiplied tenfold, and her own pregnancy, instead of forcing the world to reckon with her, would be drowned out by Electra's revelation, twisting the narrative so Luna was no longer a woman in pain but just one half of a humiliating rivalry, doomed to live in her shadow. Her lips quivered as she finally managed to speak. "You're lying, you have to be lying," her voice breaking at the edges, but Electra only smirked, her hand once again brushing across her stomach with an infuriating confidence that made it impossible to tell whether she was telling the truth or simply orchestrating the ultimate manipulation, because Electra understood one thing Luna had yet to master. Perception was power, and in that room, in that moment, perception was already tipping in her favor. Bill shifted uncomfortably, his voice rough with frustration as he demanded, "Electra, this better not be some stunt, because if you're playing games with something like this, it won't end well for you." But even his warning didn't cut through the tension, because Electra didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't back down, and instead turned her gaze back to Luna with a venomous sweetness that dripped like honey over poison. "Does it scare you, Luna? That you're not so special anymore? That maybe, just maybe, you and I are more alike than you'd ever admit," and those words were a blade, carving straight through Luna's chest, because deep down, beneath her fury, beneath her disbelief, a terrifying question gnawed at her. What if Electra was right? What if they were mirrors of each other, destined to be locked in a cycle of rivalry that would spill down into the very children they carried? The room seemed to tilt again, faces swimming in her vision, the sound of her own pulse deafening in her ears, and as she fought to steady herself, to cling to something solid in the middle of the whirlwind, Luna realized with a sick twist in her stomach that no matter how much she wanted to deny it, Electra's revelation had already succeeded in its mission, because Luna wasn't in control anymore. and that loss of control was more terrifying than anything else she'd ever faced. The room seemed to shrink around Luna, the walls pressing in as the reality of Electra's words sank deeper and deeper into her bones, and every instinct screamed at her to fight, to lash out, to reclaim some semblance of power in the chaos, but her body betrayed her, trembling as if she were a marionette whose strings had been severed, because the truth was unavoidable. This revelation wasn't just a shock. It was a seismic shift that altered the ground beneath her life, and suddenly every plan she'd made, every fragile alliance she'd relied on, felt like sand slipping through her fingers, impossible to hold onto, impossible to secure, and yet, even in the swirl of panic, a spark of defiance flared within her, fierce and unrelenting, demanding that she not let Electra win without a fight, demanding that she carve out her own narrative before it was stolen from her, because Luna had survived betrayal, humiliation, and near destruction before, and though this was different, though this was bigger, though it involved the very core of her identity, her unborn child, she knew she couldn't crumble now, not when the stakes had never been higher. Electra, meanwhile, basked in the chaos she'd sown, her smirk widening ever so slightly, her body language radiating triumph and challenge all at once, as if daring Luna to respond, and the subtle shift in the room was palpable. Bill's hands flexed at his sides, Ridge's jaw tightened. Steffi whispered urgently to Finn, whose eyes darted between Luna and Electra. Like a man caught in a storm he couldn't navigate, but Luna barely noticed them, because her entire focus had narrowed to one point, Electra, and the child she carried, and the unspoken war that had just begun, a war whose battle lines were drawn not in words but in the very essence of who they were, in their shared histories, their ambitions, and the tangled web of love, resentment, and desire that bound them together in a drama far bigger than either of them. And as Luna's gaze dropped instinctively to her own stomach, feeling the weight of life growing within her, she understood with a terrifying clarity that the two pregnancies weren't just about babies, they were symbols, weapons, and shields in a war where victory would mean more than survival, where the consequences of failure could ripple through generations, touching every family, every secret, every relationship. And in that quiet, excruciating moment, Luna realized something else. She was no longer just fighting for herself or for her unborn child, she was fighting to define the very narrative of her life before it was rewritten entirely by Electra's hand, and the realization sent a shiver down her spine, equal parts fear and determination, because she knew this was only the beginning, the opening salvo of a battle that would consume them all, and there was no turning back. Before, and though this was different, though this was bigger, though it involved the very core of her identity, her unborn child, she knew she couldn't crumble now, not when the stakes had never been higher. She could feel the weight of Electra's triumph pressing down on her like a physical force, the smirk, the poised hand on the stomach, the unspoken challenge, it all screamed dominance. A claim over a territory Luna had once thought was hers alone, and in that instant, Luna realized that this wasn't just about rivalry anymore. This was about survival, about strategy, about deciding how to wield her own pregnancy as a shield and a weapon in the escalating storm, because if she didn't act with precision, if she didn't think 2, 3, 5 steps ahead, Electra would dictate every move, every perception, every whisper in the Forrester and Spencer empires. And yet, as the room held its collective breath, Luna felt a fierce clarity cutting through the panic, a cold, burning focus that sharpened her thoughts into something dangerous and deliberate. She would not be erased, she would not be overshadowed, she would not be rendered powerless, and as she lifted her gaze to meet Electra's once more, that defiance blazed openly in her eyes, a silent promise that though the battle lines had been redrawn and the playing field shifted violently beneath them, Luna was ready, and the war for their futures, for their children, for their very identities, had only just begun. Marble slab, immovable and cold, each heartbeat echoing the intensity of the challenge laid before her, and in that moment Luna understood that she was standing at a crossroads, where one choice could define her future and one misstep could let Electra seize the narrative completely, because in the world of power, deception, and family politics, perception was everything, and if Luna allowed herself to be shaken into submission, every whisper, every glance, every rumor would be twisted into proof that she had lost, that she had failed, and that Electra had won. Yet somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the anxiety, beneath the fear, a fire ignited, a fire that reminded her of every time she had clawed her way out of humiliation, of every time she had turned betrayal into strength, of every time she had refused to let someone else dictate her fate, and that fire now became her anchor, steadying her trembling limbs, sharpening her focus, and fueling a determination so potent it seemed almost tangible, a force capable of withstanding Electra's smugness, her manipulations, her calculated provocations, and Luna realized, with a surge of both terror and exhilaration, that she was not powerless, that she still had agency, that she could turn the very battlefield Electra had crafted against her into a proving ground for her own cunning and resilience, and with a slow, deliberate inhale, she lifted her chin, meeting Electra's gaze with the kind of intensity that could cut through steel, a silent declaration that she would fight back, that she would reclaim her narrative, and that the war, though just beginning, would not end until Luna had ensured that both she and her child had a place in the story, unbowed and unbroken. That she was not just standing in a room full of shocked faces, but on the edge of a cliff where every decision carried consequences that could ripple through generations, and with a slow, deliberate inhale, she felt the tension coiling in her shoulders, the weight of expectations, secrets, and rivalries pressing down like an unrelenting tide. Electra's eyes never left hers, a challenge wrapped in a smirk that seemed to say, "Step up," or "Step aside," and Luna's mind raced through every possible strategy, every potential misstep, every ally she could count on or manipulate, because in this game, hesitation was weakness and strength was measured not by how much you could endure, but by how cleverly you could turn adversity into power. She clenched her fists, feeling the pulse of life within her and the reminder that she was not just fighting for herself, but for her unborn child, for a future that Electra seemed intent on controlling, and with that thought came clarity. This was more than rivalry, it was survival, it was legacy, it was about proving to the world that she would not be overshadowed, that she would not be diminished, and that whatever battles lay ahead, Luna would face them with a combination of cunning, courage, and a relentless refusal to surrender, because in the twisted, high-stakes world she inhabited, the only certainty was that power was never given, it had to be seized, and she intended to seize it, no matter what Electra threw in her path. That the fire was more than just a spark of defiance, it was a weapon, a shield, and a compass all at once, guiding her through the labyrinth of tension, deception, and hidden agendas that filled the room. And as Luna drew in another slow, steady breath, she felt her resolve harden, muscles coiling, nerves sharpening, and thoughts crystallizing into a plan, a strategy to reclaim control over a story that Electra had tried to hijack before it had even begun. She studied Electra carefully, noting the subtle tilt of her head, the almost imperceptible gleam in her eyes, the confidence that came from knowing she had delivered the perfect shock, and Luna knew that countering it would require more than mere words, it would require timing, precision, and a willingness to expose just enough vulnerability to disarm the opponent without relinquishing her own power, because in the world they inhabited, every glance, every gesture, every whispered comment could be weaponized, and Luna understood that too. Survive this confrontation intact, she would have to play the long game, using patience as a blade, perception as armor, and determination as the force driving her forward. And as her gaze locked with Electra's once more, there was no question left. Luna was ready, poised, and fully aware that the war for control, for narrative, for legacy, had only just begun, and that she would emerge from it stronger, sharper, and unbowed. The tension in the room thickened as every second stretched into an eternity, each heartbeat a drum signaling the impending storm, and Luna felt herself teetering on the knife edge between despair and determination, because the reality of Electra's revelation was more than just shocking, it was transformative, a pivot point that threatened to redefine alliances, loyalties, and every future interaction within the Forrester and Spencer empires. And Luna knew that if she allowed herself to be consumed by shock, she would lose the initiative, lose the narrative, and lose the chance to secure her own place in a world that seemed determined to strip her of control. She tightened her jaw, her hands pressing instinctively against her abdomen, the tiny life growing within her a reminder that her actions now were about more than ego or rivalry. They were about survival, about legacy, about claiming a space for herself and her child that no one, not even Electra, could take away. And yet, as she considered her next move, she realized that this confrontation was not a single battle but the opening salvo in a protracted war, one where every glance, every word, and every calculated pause would carry the weight of power and perception, where a single misstep could be amplified into catastrophe, and where resilience and cunning would be as vital as strength and courage. And so she drew herself up, letting the fire in her chest blaze brighter, refusing to let Electra's smugness and theatrical triumph dictate the terms of her reality, vowing silently that whatever twists, betrayals, or shocks lay ahead, she would meet them head-on, armed with strategy, determination, and an unshakable commitment to her unborn child and the future they both deserved, because in a world ruled by ambition, deception, and legacy, Luna understood that power was never surrendered, it was claimed, and she would claim it, no matter the cost.